Hello, I'm Msgr Jim Lisante. Today on Personally Speaking, I'll be joined by the actor Will Yun Lee. Will currently stars on the hit ABC medical drama The Good Doctor. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and actor Will Yun Lee joins me now. Will stars as Dr. Alex Park on the ABC hit medical drama The Good Doctor and the Netflix sci-fi series Altered Carbon. Will had a recurring role on the CBS series Hawaii Five-0, and his film credits include the James Bond film Die Another Day, Total Recall, and The Wolverine opposite Hugh Jackman. Will was born to Korean immigrants, and his father is a Taekwondo master, one of the first Taekwondo masters to come to the United States. Will also became accomplished in martial arts and received a sports scholarship to the University of California at Berkeley. Will is married to the actress Jennifer Birmingham, and together they have a terrific son named Cash. Will is here with us today to talk about his life, his career, and as an Asian American actor, his time as family member, why martial arts is important to him, and the values that have sustained him throughout his life. Joining me now, I'm very pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking the actor Will Yun Lee. We're here with Will Yun Lee, and we're talking about a lot of things today, but I first discovered Will, even though he's acted in lots of things, I discovered him, as many people have, through The Good Doctor, which is a favorite program of mine. How did you get involved in the show? Why do you think, for people like me, we are addicted to it? What is there about that show that makes us not want to let it go?
I'm good friends with Daniel Day Kim, who's one of the producers on The Good Doctor. And at the time, I was shooting another TV show, funny enough, in Toronto, which is the colder side of Canada. And he called me, and at that moment, very few members on our show in the Toronto show knew that we were canceled. And so I just heard this news, and I think literally the next day I get a call from Daniel, and he's just kind of with a half chuckle said, "You wouldn't happen to be available, would you?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, yes, our show is not canceled." So I auditioned for the role and ended up doing it. And I think my first episode was with Regina King, who was directing it. And it was just it started from there. And honestly, the show is one of the last, to answer your second question, one of the last shows of hope, on network television. It's kind of like, there's so many dark shows, which I love, but also I think it's becoming overcrowded with the dark and the very gritty shows and violent shows. And this is one of the last of the dying breeds, I think, of just great television based and anchored in hope.
Had you given some thought before you got involved with it in terms of your own attitudes toward people with disabilities? Because really the other thing the show beautifully gets into is that we're all disabled in one way or another. But what was your own experience of disability? Did you know anybody who was going through that?
Well, not so much, in terms of autism, but, it was a very tough decision for me to join the show, purely because of the fact that my son at the time had been very, very sick. And, we had spent years in the hospital, and he was going through brain surgery and chemo and all these different things. So I had been in the hospital system for years, in the most horrible places, which is a children's ICU unit.
Yeah.
And, when you're there for months at a time and the cafeteria and the gift shop become like, different bedrooms in your life, it was very difficult to go onto a show where the set looks exactly like what you lived in. So I remember the first week shooting, I literally would break down every other scene.
Wow.
So, yeah, even just, talking about it now, it's, it's so emotional. But, I think what drove me to the show, and it's not so much when you talk about disability, it's more about, for me, what drew me to it was we had been misdiagnosed with my son so many times, and they'd given him chemo and they shouldn't have, and they did all these different things. And the show, my wife and my fight became about what's the next answer? I refuse that answer. What's the next thing I can research? And it became this long journey of research that eventually got us to the correct diagnosis, which our show is kind of like these doctors looking outside the box of how do we fix the situation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it all threaded together.
Even though sometimes you can be the tough guy on the show, the truth is you always have a heart of gold and you have a deep compassion and empathy as a doctor. Did you run into doctors who were particularly kind to you and your wife through the challenges that Cash faced?
Oh yeah, it was, it's, you run the gambit, and it's about, I always say, like, even though I play a doctor on TV, it's, you are your child's advocate. You're the only person who can fight for him. And so, most of the doctors were incredible and kind, but a lot of the doctors just said, I remember one doctor telling us, stop looking on the internet because this is what your son has, which is he's going to live in the gray area for the rest of his life. And we refused that answer. And when we found this team at Stanford, I mean, we talk about angels and superheroes. That's what they were to us.
Wow. I got to ask you, you probably know this. I'm not telling you something you haven't heard before, but for every marriage, when a child is sick, it can go either way. It can be something that bonds you two together or it causes you to go separately. How did you and your wife stay a team so that you could best serve your son?
Yeah. It was, a lot of it was, we both had a lot of faith in God, and we're just, it was a lot of different things, but because we grew up with, even though we're culturally very different upbringings, I think faith was a huge part of our upbringing. And we made a pact from day one when he had his first stroke that, sorry, that, our mission was to keep him alive. So that, that solved 90% of the hardships a couple has to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
The countless chemo drips, and, you just get 12, a 3-year-old in a 12-hour drip, once a week is just too much for a parent to take. So yeah, it was faith, it was a lot of faith and a lot of prayers from a lot of different people.
That's great stuff, Will. For some people, and I don't blame them, by the way, I'm not a dad. I'm just close to nieces and nephews. But whenever somebody we love gets into trouble like Cash did, even as a believer, sometimes I want to shake my fist in God's face and say, what the heck are you thinking? You can make this different. Even as people of faith, did you have times when you question what's God thinking in all this?
Oh, every day.
Yeah.
Every day. It's like, one of these journeys is just like, and I'm sure a lot of parents and a lot of your listeners who've gone through this with different loved ones, is the tunnel is so dark and there's not even a creak of light. And so you are walking this tunnel that just seems to go on year after year and get, your feet swept out under you. Like the rays of good news last so short. So you literally, my wife and I just felt like we were walking down the darkest tunnel without any sense of direction. And, I tell you, it's thank God for her, and thank God for her fight in her and the fight in that little kid. Like, eventually the light, and it came in the form of these doctors and nurses and people coming together. So I tell you, faith, it feels so cliche to say sometimes, but that was the only thing that got us through this.
Well, when I celebrate weddings, which most weekends I do, so that I can preach a better homily, I always ask the couples, there's a billion people out there you could have married. Why this one? How do you know this is the one for you? If you had been doing that about Jennifer, you've already mentioned, well, we knew we had the common faith, common belief, but what else was there in her personality or her makeup that made you say, I could do 40 or 50 years with this woman?
Yeah, it was a thing that she's the funniest person, that I've ever met. And it's crazy because, during that, especially during this period with my son being sick, it was a solid 3 years of just horribleness, was she knew her job was to make him laugh, that was, whether she was putting like diapers on her head or, and this kid is literally taking 17 bottles of poison. And, she would make it as fun as it could be. And that's what got him through,
Isn't that great, though? So the sense of humor, the gift of faith. She's also, for the people watching the show, among the most gorgeous women in the world. You know that, right?
No, she is beautiful. She is. She just turned 40, and I was like, man, I said, you look good for 40. She goes, you mean 30?
She's a wise woman. Wise woman. I got to ask you too. Early in the program, when you and I were talking, you talked about this one show ending and falling into the Good Doctor, which is great. But even though you are an actor who works a lot, every actor goes through times when you're perfect for stuff and you don't get it. How in your path in this career have you dealt with disappointment, rejection, knowing you're perfect for it, but they don't know that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, complicated like ball of yarn, and
yeah.
Part of it is very simple in the sense that I competed in martial arts for most of my life, so I knew the world of fighting for something. Mm-hmm. and rejection, and so that kind of like softened the blow of dealing with the Hollywood audition process when you get there. It's like if you had if you were at a wrestling tournament, you get a bracket and you get two wrestlers and they look at the brackets on who they're going to wrestle and who they're going to fight. And that's kind of like Hollywood auditions. It's just it's who lasts the longest, right? Who believes in themselves the most, who works hard at their craft, and who's the person who holds on the longest eventually gets there. So I had that from my father, from training, and that was a big foundational piece.
Tell us the richness about Taekwondo that he passed on to you. Why is it so important to you, and in time to Cash as well?
And me and my wife were just talking about it this morning, is when I did martial arts, it was, my dad didn't force me to do a lot of things, but it was the one thing he forced me to do. And I hated him for it when I was, young. I'd ride my bike and every other kid gets to go play basketball or join different team sports. And my dad made me ride my bike to the martial arts studio. And I stayed there from 3 to 9, did my homework, trained. And it was such a regimen in my life that, I could never repay him for it. Wow. It's like, and it's the mark of like, for me, he wasn't my friend, he was mm-hmm. my dad. And he's like, this is good for you. And, it took me a long time to realize he was right. But, had he not done that for me and just always given me the easy pass out, there's no way that I would have made it as an actor in terms of having to deal with the first, 10 years of auditioning and rejection. So, that was that. Yeah.
We're so often formed and shaped by our parents. You've talked publicly plenty of times about your dad and the legacy he gave you, which you treasure. Tell us about what Mom did right.
Yeah, she was the rock in terms of, she's very opinionated and tells me what I need to do. Tells me I always need to get a medical checkup because I'm approaching 50. But she's the person that we could always count on. We say the big ticket items, meaning like I'm in trouble and she will, she's probably 110 pounds and I need help with this, or I need help with that, like real monumental moments in my life. And she just quietly always made it happen. And it's, I have countless examples, but it's like, that mother love is real. It's mm-hmm. like the wolf pack mom. She will fight and beat up whoever she has to make sure, things are right for me. So, yeah.
Well, just as your wife doesn't look her age, neither do you. So I mentioned that by way of a lot of my actor friends see in our youth culture and our looks culture aging as the enemy. You don't seem to be very bothered by age. Do you have a perspective on the whole thing about aging gracefully?
I mean, do I do I wish I could be 30 again? Absolutely. I mean, it's so different when when you first come to LA, everyone just dreams of being on a movie set, and you're very to survive, you have to be very hungry and borderline obsessive in working on your craft and finding an agent and finding a job and finding your way in that world. But as I've gotten older and I've had a family and a son and, a million dogs, for me, my paradigm shifted, which was, and it's why I married my wife. It was about making memories as opposed to making money.
Okay.
And so, we aren't rich, but we're very rich in finding those moments. And coming from Asian culture, we live in a very disciplined, at least I had a very disciplined upbringing. There was no vacations. There was no spending money on going to the movies.
Right.
It was a one mission deal. It was, you're going to go to Harvard. I didn't go to Harvard. And so what I learned from my wife and her family is they take the time to make moments, And so for me, my attitude towards Hollywood, and yes, I'm still very hungry and I'm very, love what I do, but I'm looking into the next couple of chapters of my life. It's different, it's about, all right, I'm going to go do this job that I love. And then we're going to go do something great. We're going to go to our in-laws and be in Louisiana and go fishing every day. Those are the things that make me happy.
You mentioned working in terms of the Asian milieu, and I'm wondering, I'm told you have a new production company, Seoul Productions, and by Seoul we mean the capital of South Korea. Tell me about how you came to take the chance of saying, no, I'm gonna create my own world, my own production company.
Yeah, so my managers, who also have a production company, their company is called Wonder Street, and we decided to come together and do Soul Street.
Okay.
And it's very much, it's putting together the right elements for different points of views, which start from the writers, which start from, if the majority of the traditional aspect of or history of Hollywood is, it's one subsection of people who write stories and then write stories what they think about Asian Americans or African Americans or Mexican Americans, but they might not have grown up in it. And for us, our mission has always been we're going to find those voices and let them create it from the beginning and bring it up. So part of it is, and it's not just Asian American stories, one of them is about my dad, and yes, it involves, a Korean immigrant, but it essentially is about the first African American Black martial arts team. So it's, at that time in the late 60s, it was mostly, white fighters with Japanese and Korean masters. And then in comes a group in the late 1960s that my dad, brought up at the YMCA, and it was the first time you saw African-American fight teams, and they came in and dominated circuit for a good 10 years. So it's about finding those subsections and marrying and showing that we are just as woven in through society of America. Because when I grew up, I didn't get to see myself on screen. I didn't get to see people who look like me, who talk like me. Right. And, the only person we had was Bruce Lee. And, he died a long time ago. Yeah. So every time we'd see an occasional Asian American, someone that was raised in America, spoke English, had so much, just of the mixed influence of Asian culture and American culture, we didn't see that. And so, that's part of my mission statement, is finding some of those stories.
I'm a big Broadway guy, and I remember years ago going to see Miss Saigon, the first production, and the protests outside because the lead was being played by an Englishman playing an Asian, and I didn't at that time fully understand why there'd be an objection. I do now because of consciousness raised by people like you. Even though Will, for our listeners, is a American-born guy, have you had any kind of direct experiences of prejudice? A friend of mine who was from Korea and moved here about 10 years ago, called me recently, and Jang Moon is his name. He couldn't believe that somebody cursed him out in New York City because they thought he was Chinese, and they blamed the virus on him and all this insanity. Mm-hmm. But has that been any part of your experience, that kind of bigotry or prejudice?
I mean, yeah, it's, kids can be mean. And so you grow up with it, and you eventually find your way. But, it's out there. And eventually you get to college, which is an interesting place to be because, in high school, they say, right, you look for friends that you think you want to be associated with.
Right.
And when you get to college, you find people who are like you. And so, for me, I have experienced a lot of those situations. And, to be honest, like in this current climate, I get nervous for my parents to go out running simple errands. And even my, if they see my son who's of mixed race, like, and he looks very Asian, like, what that looks like. So, yeah, and hopefully the more awareness there is that change can start happening.
You talked before, Will, about coming together with your wife and both of you having this gift of faith. Go back in your upbringing. How was that gift of faith given to you? And do you guys have some ideas on how best to pass it on to your son?
I don't know. I don't know how it was, because, when you have immigrant parents, they speak to you in their native language.
Right.
And, you grow up learning, I was born in Virginia. You grow up learning English. Yeah. And they're wanting you to learn English. And then eventually, like my parents are very quiet people. Like there were no moments like, Leave It to Beaver where, my dad would teach me a lesson, like right. The only lessons I learned from them was just watching them, and their actions. And so that became my foundation. And I don't know where, I've always just had this belief that, faith at the end of the day has to be ground zero.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm getting what you're saying. Let me ask you this too. With the people that you work with on the set of The Good Doctor, is there a shared community there? Yeah.
I mean, especially this year, you'll notice it is like the amount of care and attention everyone has brought to COVID and making sure the set is safe, that, none of our cast members, we're all very conscious of what our role is. Like if I was 18, I don't know if I'd have the same consciousness of like, hey, I shouldn't go there, or I shouldn't go and, to a club or to a dinner, a big gathering. Like everyone's very aware we have a mission to complete this show.
Yeah.
And so the sense of community and sense of care is second to none. It's, we're one of the rare shows that have had, only maybe 3 or 4 days of a shutdown based on just being extra careful. So yeah, it goes to show the team.
There's something for everybody on that show too. I have rheumatoid arthritis, so when the beautiful blonde doctor got that on her hand, I was like, "Oh my God, it's about me!" But why did we knock off the good Mexican American doctor?
Those are all questions above my pay grade.
I was going to say, do you ever know ahead of time, or the script is given to you as you go?
I've been on so many different shows. I remember being the show on FX a long time ago where I was, everyone waited to read the script the next week because I was the guy who would take out series regulars. And it wasn't a fun thing to do because they like me as friends, but then they're like, they know that I'm the guy who comes and takes care of situations in this kind of crime show. But yeah, I mean, on this show, you know, it's just a weird game. You never really know. And so I always look at it like when you do a show, you enjoy it for the year. And if you get invited back, you get invited back.
Okay. There's a fellow, Dr. Bill Baker, who was president of PBS, and he's an old friend of ours, but he wrote a book basically saying that you as artists in the acting community, to survive now, have to also be entrepreneurs. Are you a good entrepreneur?
I don't think so. I'm not. Yeah, no, probably not. I mean, but I'm trying. I'm trying with Soul Street, and we have some really great projects lined up that we're developing.
Okay.
Maybe that's the beginning of my entrepreneurial space.
I promise the last question. Your son and your wife, filled with hope, you trust that he's going to have a bright and beautiful future, and you're going to make it happen with the grace of God? You believe in that, don't you?
I do.
You're an amazing dad, amazing husband. Thank you so much, Will, for being on our program. All the success in the world in terms of your career, but I wanted you on because of all the things you've said, and not just here, but other places, about your sense of hope, your sense of faith, your unconditional love for your son and for your wife. You're kind of an amazing man in so many ways. And thank you for sharing your journey with us. As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. To listen to our Personally Speaking podcast with some of our most recent shows, all you need to do is go to YouTube and punch in Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Personally Speaking is also available as a podcast on personallyspeakingpodcast.buzzsprout.com. You can also listen to past episodes by going to www.closeencountertv.com. And I'd ask you as well to go to my parish website, which is www.ollmp.org. We have past shows as well as Msgr Jim's weekly mass and homilies. Personally Speaking is also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. Please share yourself with others, especially in your family. Personally Speaking is made possible because of the generosity and kindness of many people. I wanted to thank the law office of Anthony Capitola. I want to thank Peg and Pete D'Angelo, and for all of you who have given support, including my friend Randy and Tom Slade, in keeping us on the air. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. I want to thank you all for being with us, and we hope you'll be with us again next time on Personally Speaking.